Annika Tjuka is a linguist who currently works as a doctoral researcher in the Department of Linguistic and Cultural Evolution at the MPI-SHH. She completed her master's degree in linguistics at the Humboldt University in Berlin, where she specialized in psycholinguistics and typology. Her research interest is the diversity of language variation in word meanings. And in her most recent publication, she and her co-authors introduce a database that combines data from both psychology and linguistics. It's an openly curated database for interdisciplinary studies across diverse languages. And today she will present an introduction to linguistic and cultural evolution, which focuses on the importance of language and the reconstruction of human history with languages. Annika, you can take it away.
Thank you, Kali. Thank you also for being here. I see a lot of people. I see some familiar faces, some new faces. So yeah, hopefully this is new to some of you. For some of you, maybe this is a recap what we do at our department. So yeah, I'm going to introduce you to linguistic and cultural evolution. And this is mainly the work that we do in our DLCE department. So throughout the summer school, you will probably hear a lot of acronyms where you have yeah, DAG, DA, and DLCE as the main three departments of our institute. And the DLCE department is the Linguistics and Cultural Evolution department. So let's get started. First, giving you a short overview. So I will introduce some of the key terms to you and then go into the aims and the research question of linguistic and cultural evolution. And my presentation has a long list of methods that we use because we use a lot of different methods. And so the focus of this talk is giving you a broad overview, and then you can go into each of the classes to get a more detailed understanding of the methods, the research questions, and the things that we do in linguistic and cultural evolution. And in the end, I have a case study where I show you what you can take from languages or learn from languages for the reconstruction of human history. And then we go into a summary and an outlook. Okay, so first I would like to give you an idea of the key terms. So we have linguistic diversity, we have cultural diversity, and we have evolution in our title of today's presentation. But first, I would like to do one activity. And since I'm the first starting this whole summer school off, I hope this works well. I will post the link into the chat, and hopefully you can then check out this Mentimeter and add what language you speak. So you can also use the QR code and do it on your mobile phone. That's also possible. And then you can enter all the languages that you are familiar with and that you speak. So yeah, I will wait just a couple of seconds and I will, yeah, and Ines, yeah, so you speak it, you learned it maybe at some point, you can read it. I am not going to differentiate between passive and active knowledge. I'm not going to test you. So if you put in there that you speak Danish, I'm not going to question you. So you should be able to put in the languages that you feel comfortable with putting on this platform. Okay, so now you should see what's happening on the slide. So yes, we have English right in the middle. I'm guessing that most of you are quite familiar with English since you are here and you hear me talk and know what I'm talking about. We have other Indo-European languages. I'm just looking out for some interesting or not Indo-European languages. We have Hausa, which is cool. We have, since it's changing, Japanese, nice. That's also Ayaka. She's also speaking Japanese. Little German, I like that. So yeah, I'm guessing that means that you speak only a little bit of German. Cool. Yes, okay, Sama. There are also some languages that I'm not familiar with. Also some languages that I heard of, but never learned them. And some of them are really, yeah, that's Timo, I'm guessing. So yeah, by the languages, and since I know some of the department members, I would expect that I know who's behind one of the languages. But yes, I'm not going to reveal your identity here. Okay, so I will post that's evolving still. There are still people putting in languages in there. I will share that on our Mattermost channel at the end of the presentation. So if you didn't get around to add your language yet, but this gives you an overview, and you can also look out for the people who might speak a language that you want to learn. Maybe you want to get to know another language. So yeah, this is your chance to seek out the people who speak a cool language and get to know each other. And I will go back to the presentation now. Okay, so as you saw from this little bit of task, there are many languages in the world, and I'm sure that most of you know that. And this graphic here is only a snapshot of some of the languages that you will find across the globe. These are some major languages, but not not all of the languages. Not all of the languages or language families are integrated here in this graph. So these are language families, and what you can see from this map is that there are certain language families that cover a huge ground. That does not necessarily mean that there is a lot of languages in the language family. And when I speak of language family, I mean a group of languages that are related to one another. So for example, all of you speak English, and English is a Germanic language. The Germanic languages are in the European languages. So there is a relationship between languages. And what you can see here, so in the European, as one of the languages where you have English, Spanish, German, Italian, many other languages as well, are spread throughout the globe. We have North America, of course, English speaking, we have South America, Spanish speaking, and then we have Europe, where many of the Indo-European, and Russian is also Indo-European. And then we have Africa, which is a hotspot of linguistic diversity, basically, which is not represented in this graph because these are the two main language families, but they include many languages. I will get to the numbers in a second. And then we have here Papua New Guinea and off the coast of Australia, where you also have a lot of different language families or different languages within the Austronesian family. But what we need to keep in mind, so we have all this linguistic diversity, but on the other hand, we have many people speaking only one language, maybe two languages, and then in certain parts of the world, some other parts are more multilingual, where you have speakers who speak 5, 6, 7, 8 languages. But what this shows you is that 14% of the human population, this is from 2007, so it's not updated, but still, 14% speak Mandarin Chinese, and then it drops down to 6% of the human population speaking Spanish, and then English, Hindi, and Arabic, which are basically the main languages that many people speak, and you have many languages that are spoken only by a few speakers. These are sometimes languages that are spoken only by 2-3 people, sometimes a couple of hundred, sometimes a couple of thousand. But so you see that even if it's similar to biodiversity. So you have these languages that are spoken by many people, and then you have many, many different other languages that are spoken by only a few people. These are the linguistic diversity in numbers, and so there is like an estimate of how many languages are in the world, and this is about 7,000, but you can go to different resources and find different numbers, and I just want to point that out because sometimes it's confusing if you put into Google and search for how many languages there are. Sometimes you get 8,000, sometimes you get 6,000. So it's also a question of what you define as a language, and how do you group different languages into one language family. And we will get to that in a bit more detail throughout the talk. So Ethnologue is one of the resources that you can use, and Wikipedia is actually using for their graphics and things, mostly Ethnologue. And there it says that there are 7,111 languages with 140, about 40 language family. And the largest language families are the Niger-Congo, Austronesian, and Trans-New Guinea. And then we have Glottolog on the other side, which is a database that is hosted and curated in our department. And it's now in its 4th version. So we have version updates of our databases. And Glottolog also includes dead languages. So Latin, for example, is they're listed there as well. And you see the differences in how many languages are counted there and how many language families, and also in the largest language family. So in comparison to Ethnologue, we have Atlantic Congo as the largest language family. And interestingly, the Austronesian language family seems to be quite stable in the sense that both sources account almost the same number of languages to that family. You will learn more about that, and I'm highlighting some of the classes throughout my talk because I want you to go there and learn more about this topic. So Hedvig is going to give you an idea of linguistic typology and then a comparison of languages. So we have another term there. So we have linguistic and cultural evolution in our title of this talk, but can we do the same activity that I asked you for the languages? Can we do that with culture? So can I ask you, put in the culture that you belong to? That's an open question. I don't want you to do that right now because I want the slide to be only languages, but keep in mind that this is an open question. We can discuss that also at the end of this talk. And yeah, so what culture do you belong to? Would you answer with a country? Would you answer with the language that you speak? Maybe your parents moved to another place. So in what culture did you grow up? This really is an interesting question, and a question that we are also concerned with at our department. There are certain possible variables that you can define and then look into, and we have also a database called dplace where you have variables like economy. So what's the economic system in the place that you live or that you grew up in? What are the marriage systems? So who can you marry? Who do you need to marry maybe? And then, of course, housing. So do you live in a round house? Like, is it shaped in a round circle? or is it like a rectangle? Or so there are different games. There is a recent paper on games. So different variables that you can look into to see what culture someone is belonging to, or how you could define culture in a sense. And yeah, if you want to learn more about that, I would recommend checking out the dplays. I will, of course, make all the slides available to you afterwards, so you can click on all the links and check out all the different things that I'm pointing you to. And then we have this huge term, evolution, in our title. So we have evolution as the basis of our modern day life, basically. And the theory was developed by Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. And Darwin then manifested this, his theory on the origin of species in his work. So Darwin proclaimed that evolutionary processes operate based on natural selection. And what I found interesting, when you read through The Origin of Species, you will find that Darwin here and there makes some references to languages. So maybe some of you have a background in biology or are interested in biology. So there is an interesting relation between biology or evolutionary biology and linguistics. I'm not going to go into the details of the history here, but just wanted to share that this quote, which you can read on your own, where Darwin, he tries to illustrate his view on classification. So how to classify different species into groups, basically. And as an example, he uses languages. And I think even if you're not a linguist, you know that certain languages can be grouped together based on their similarities. And I think it's telling that Darwin, as a biologist working on different species, thought of, there is this commonality with languages, and I can use that because it seems to be quite obvious and people can understand those examples as well. So basically, we are in our department try to look at linguistic and cultural evolution with different types of methods, and some of these methods are based on evolutionary biology. Okay, so this was a very broad overview of the three key terms: linguistic diversity, cultural diversity, and evolution. Now I'm going into the aims, research questions, and methods. But to illustrate, so we are all at home or somewhere else. I wanted to share with you this video because I think we need a little bit of looking outside of our own four squares that we been in for so long. And I think this video, you will see some people behind the things that I'm talking about, and you will also see the landscape and the work that we do in our department. So I'm again stopping my screen and we'll change to the video. Okay, so yeah, you heard quite a lot. You saw where we are working in which area, how we combine the different data, and also some of the people of our department. Mary, you will see her in the roundtable discussion as well on Thursday. So yeah, I hope this gave you an insight into our work in general. And now I'm going to go into, or I will summarize some of the aims and the research questions, and then I will go into the different methods. So The big aim is to describe and explain the patterns of variation across the world. And as Russell, our director, said in the video, so it's not only about the patterns, but it's about getting those different data into structuring them and exploring them to see the evolution of language, culture, and cognition. And we work across many different disciplines. So within our department, we have archaeologists and linguists and computer scientists, but we also collaborate, of course, with a lot of different people from different fields. And then we also use various methods, because depending on what data you have or what you would like to explore, you need to use various methods. But one of the key methods I will show you in this presentation. The research questions for languages. So what causes linguistic diversity? That's a huge question, and it not will be answered in one study, but with many studies and with many smaller studies, we can explore and see what are the driving forces behind linguistic diversity and what are the motivators to languages differentiating. So at the beginning, I said that languages are related, but some languages are really different. For example, if you're a Mandarin Chinese speaker, it's very different to go then into English and learn English. Maybe some of you had this experience, and that's due to the difference of the languages. And then if we go into cultural diversity, so there as well, what are the causes and how did this cultural diversity emerge? But also, why do we lose cultural diversity? That's the same for linguistic diversity, that's the same for biodiversity. So what drives people to give up their cultural identity in one place? And then if we go into the interdisciplinary work, what are the intersections between cultural and genetic diversity? So is there a link? Is there no link? And how can genetic histories inform insights from archaeology and historical linguistics? And then, of course, we also look at how these different cognitive abilities evolve. So we have also members in our department who either look at humans, at cognitive abilities in humans, but also in other species like birds or dogs. So this is also some of the things that are going on in our department. Here is a list of methods. I'm going through each of them, depending on your background. You might know some of the methods, you might be new to them. And so there are, I will just go through them and you will see what you can take from them, and I will summarize that in the end as well. So first of all, language documentation. And as you saw in the video, Mary was doing that, and she was filmed while documenting one of the languages. So language documentation is basically our bread and butter. Every field worker who is going out into a language community, documenting a language, studying another language, is then bringing back a lot of valuable information. And sometimes they don't get enough credit for that. And I think it's really important to know that without them, without people going into very remote places and building relationships with the people there, we cannot do all the fancy Bayesian methods and so on. So we need people that go and have fun documenting languages, and they should be valued because they are the foundation of everything that we do. So you go into a language community, you document the language, you speak with the speakers, and then basically what's the output? and that's a very old form of output. And nowadays you have a USB stick or like a hard drive where you then have all your information, and then you have a PDF with your grammar. But that's not like, you cannot put that on a nice picture. So I brought you this older version, and then you have a grammar and a dictionary, depending on how you structure the data. But most of the time, the output of language documentation is a grammar, including or an extra dictionary, so that you can look up all the sentences that you have in the grammar and understand them. So this is the end result of language documentation, but what do we do from there? So there is this method called the comparative method. It's a very old method within linguistics. I'm not going to go into the history of the comparative methods. I can point you to a great podcast where you will learn all about the comparative method and how it evolved. It evolved actually in Europe. And so the aim of the comparative method is, first of all, it's comparing languages, of course, but you want to reconstruct an earlier language or ancestral language, and it's often called proto-language. So if we speak about Proto-Indo-European or Proto-Sino-Tibetan, then you have an ancestral language that you reconstruct from the languages that you have attested. So basically written in those grammars, written in text, and of course now recordings of speakers. And then you try to reconstruct a shared ancestor of the languages that you are comparing. And you compare different features. You can compare grammatical features, so structural features, and you compare basic vocabulary, and we will get to that as well. So the goal of this method is to discover the relationship between languages and then building a language family tree. And what you can see here is the first language tree, the Indo-Germanic languages by August Schleicher, which was actually a professor or a scholar in Jena, so very close to our department at the University of Jena. So this is basically how a very old language family tree looks like. You might be familiar with species trees, or if you are interested, for example, in the evolution of forces, you could basically build your own tree. And this is what we do for languages. So at the end tip of the tree, you have the now, like this is of course a very old version, but you have German here, and so these trees get built based on the comparative method, and that's the output that you will receive if you compare these different languages, and then you try to reconstruct from the things that you see here, from the different features, and reconstruct to the Proto-Indo-Germanic language or Proto-Indo-European language if you go farther to the left, basically. So many family trees, and we will talk about this in our Bayesian phylogenetic linguistics lecture, use basic vocabulary. And the task of a historical linguist is to sort out the relationship between the words and group them into categories. So you have words that are unrelated, so they just are developed in without any connection to other languages, but you also will have common inheritance and cognate. This is a term that you need to remember. Cognates are the things that we use to establish those family trees, and these are direct inheritance of different languages. So you see, for example, if you have I will go to the examples if we do the task in a minute. So yeah, this is common inheritance, and then we have borrowing loans, where you have an indirect inheritance. So you borrow something from another language. You might have noticed in the video that there are certain words that you know and that you can then identify as loans. And you will hear more about loanwords and narrative in historical linguistics from Rasmus on Wednesday. So you can check out that class to learn more about the different, also about the methods and how to establish loanwords. Okay, now we are going to do a breakout room task. So I hope this works with this large of a group, but the task is that you should write down 5 words that your group considers as basic vocabulary. So what does basic vocabulary mean? That means that it is a list of words that you can take with you. It's not important where you are, but you can take it with you, go into a very different language community. For example, I would go with my list to Vanuatu and then ask the people in Vanuatu to give me the names that they use for those vocabulary items. So I'm not going to give you any examples because I want you to figure that out on your own or in your group. You have 15 minutes time for this task. So I will put you into groups of about 5 people. I would ask all the people who are linguists who know what basic vocabulary is to step a little bit back and maybe let the others develop an idea on their own. And if they don't come up with some of the words that you deem to be important, then you can help them. But this is especially for all of you who are not linguists and who haven't thought about what's basic vocabulary. And also I would ask all the teachers and volunteers who are already familiar or should be familiar with the term basic vocabulary to either stay in the main room so that we can chat among each other and let the students do the task, or you can go into the different rooms and just listen in and maybe help out if there are any questions. So please, if there is a question, so you decide on the 5 words that you would like to put on your basic vocabulary list. And when you then come back into the main room, I would like you to paste your answer into the chat. This can be like this, just a simple list, word 1, word 2, word 3, and so on. And so that it is in one message, so that I then in the end can take this list and put it into a chart and then compare it and see what you came up with. And so this is a bit easier than using any other method, and then you can also see what other people wrote in the chat. So if there are any questions about this task, I would like to ask you to put them in the chat right now so that I can answer them. And I would ask Kali to pause the recording. Okay, so I hope you had some discussion about, first of all, what is basic vocabulary, and then also on deciding what you put on your list as basic vocabulary. And what you can see in the chat is that there are similarities between groups. So some groups use the same words or put the same words into their message, and others chose totally different words. So this is something that I would like you to keep in mind. And that's why I wanted to do that task, so that you get a first-hand experience on deciding what basic vocabulary is. But of course, if you go into the literature and if you are a linguist, then you know about the Swedish list. The Swedish list is a list of basic vocabulary established in the 50s. And so here are some words that are deemed to be basic vocabulary. Of course, there's a lot of discussion. Can we really have a list of 100 words that we use for every language on the planet, basically, and really have all the words present in the language? So this is also something that hopefully came up in your discussion about what to put on your very, very small basic vocabulary list. So usually we work with basic vocabulary list of 100 items up to 300 items. So it depends a little bit on the languages you choose and what types of lists you accumulate. Most of the scholars do use some sort of Swedish list or basic vocabulary list. So you went into the field, you collected your data, you want to compare the languages. And what was previously done in historical linguistics is that there's one scholar, he or she is sitting in a room, comparing the different items, also, of course, reading a lot, talking with their supervisors and other colleagues. But what one project within our department is trying to do is improving historical linguistics and giving them computational methods or computational tools so that they can standardize their comparisons. So you saw, for example, if you put up a list of words, then it's really tricky if you go into a language that structures has different writing systems, for example. If you go into Russian or Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, they have different writing systems. So how can you standardize all the data that you collected? And with computer-assisted language comparison, a project by Mattes List, you can check out the link later on. I will share the slides so you can click on them. In this project, they try to establish methods based on computer science and bioinformatics to help historical linguists to standardize their methods and standardize their comparison. And there are many different features, there are many different tools that you can use, interfaces for historical linguists to produce basically machine readable formats. And this is very important because if you have, for example, Excel or any type of other format, it does not, it might not be comparable across different formats. So if you have a machine readable format, you can make sure that others on working on other languages, for example, can take your data and compare it with their own data. So one of the tools that Mattes did develop is Editor. So if you are a historical linguist, you can check out this tutorial where you see how you can annotate your data in this format, and where you then can see how to formalize your comparison across different languages. You can integrate your own data set. You can use the data that is already within the editor, and then you can annotate them and get an output that is machine readable. So yes. And then what you do then, and as we saw in the video, Russell was talking about data and putting data together and collecting data. And I also talked about language documentation as the source of our data. What we have established in our department are many different databases. So we have a core concept, which is the cross-linguistic data formats, which was developed by Robert Forkel, who set up this format and which is used throughout our whole department. And it's short CLDF. So if you hear about CLDF, you know what it is. It's the core of our databases. And we have three different reference catalogs, Glottolog, the one that I talked about before. So this is where you will see what languages there are in the world. Concepticon is about words. And then we have many other different databases. This is not a current slide, so there are other databases coming in quite frequently actually at the moment. And we have, maybe for some of the linguists, you are familiar with the WALTS, the World Atlas of Language Structure. And then we have a huge project which is called Glottobank, where we will put up, or where we are developing different databases such as GramBank, and I'm sure you will hear GramBank throughout the summer school. And yeah, so this gives you an overview of, and we have dplays, which I talked about before, about the cultural data. So yeah, this is just to give you an idea of the different things that you will find in our department. Here are links. As I said, I will share the slides, and then you will can click on each of the databases and check them out. All of our databases are version controlled and curated with Git and GitHub. So if you are not yet familiar with Git and GitHub, this is not only important for databases, this can help you in your PhD thesis, might also be relevant for a master thesis. I know some people who wrote their entire master thesis and then their hard drive broke down and they had to start all over again. So these are tools that can help you. And also if you, I don't know, deleted something at one point, you can go back in time basically and get all the relevant data from GitHub and Git back, and you do not need to start over again. So Johannes is going to teach this class, and I hope this is next Friday, so not this Friday, but at the last day of our summer school. So please do check that out. And then we are going to, this is a very, very brief introduction, and this is basically the basic concept of Bayesian phylogenetics, which I would like you to take home, since it is important that you understand the foundation of how these methods work. And then, yeah, you can take them, and we will discuss that in our Bayesian lecture as well. But this is just to give you an idea and maybe a recap of your high school days. So probability theory is a big word. Some of you might have heard of it and probably have heard of it. So this is just a recap. So we are testing probability of how correct a tree, so a language family tree, is based on a given set of data. And we discuss basic vocabulary, that's our input data. But today, to make it a little bit simpler, we are going to talk about marbles. So we are counting probabilities. You have a bag of marbles, blue and white, and you have 4 of them inside your bag. These are the distributions, how they can occur in the bag. You don't know what's in the bag, of course. There is a great lecture series, it's a course taught by Richard McElrath, also a director at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. So this is a great reference where you can check all the basics of Bayesian inference. And this example is also from his course. And there are lecture videos, there is a book. And yeah, so if you ever want to learn about Bayesian phylogenetic methods, I would recommend that to read and go through all the different example tasks. So, okay, we have our bag of marbles. We draw from them. So we pick out one marble and then put it back. That's important. So we have a sequence that we draw from our bag, which is blue, white, blue. And so this is our conjecture. So this is our the possibilities of marbles that could be in the bag. And we then see this sequence, what we draw from the bag. And as you can see here, so if you only have white marbles, you cannot get the sequence. If you only have blue marbles, you also cannot get that sequence. So the probability of them is 0. And then for all the other ways of how these marbles could be distributed in the bag, you have different probabilities and you can count them. And this, as I said, this is basically what those fancy models, what we are going to talk about in the remainder of the whole summer school do. They count probabilities, and how you can also imagine them is in a tree, right? We want to build language trees. We want to build language family trees. So how do we get from A to B? And these are the possibilities. So this is basically the distribution of the marbles in the bag as it could be. And then you can go one layer up, and then you need to draw, or you draw a white marble, and then you have other 3 possibilities to draw a blue marble. And this is, if you have the conjecture of only one blue marble, then you have these paths. So you go through those different paths, and of course, the math behind it is a little bit more complex, but the concept is like this. And you should remember that a model goes through these different probabilities and then shows you what is the output. So the output tree is the most probable tree. It's usually not one tree, it's more than one tree. So this is also something to keep in mind. All the Bayesian phylogenetic methods articles that you will see, although it looks like one tree, these are more than one trees. And we will talk about this in our lecture on Bayesian phylogenetic linguistics in more detail with my 2 co-teachers, Natalia and Olena. So if you want to learn more about that, you should visit this class. And this is, and I'm not going to talk about any of the details of this, but this is basically the output of a Bayesian phylogenetic model putting out a tree for Indo-European. I know that there is a lot of discussion on how Indo-European evolved and where and how the different trees are grouped. So if you want to learn more about the Indo-European case, you should check out this case study taught by Rasmus and Robert, where you know more, or where you will learn more about this discussion surrounding this tree, this very complex tree. And one of the things that we also do in our department are behavioral experiments. So as I said in the beginning, we do investigate the co-evolution of cognitive abilities, for example, of humans and dogs. So we have our dog lab. Rasmus already pointed to that in his welcome speech. So we have a dog lab. That sounds a little bit scary, but it's basically a fun playroom for dogs. And since dogs are the companion of humans for at least 15,000 years in different types of settings, we want to, or within this group, they want to know how do dogs understand human communicative cues, and do dogs know what we see. And we also have a video in our Gather Town where you can check out the dog lab. This is also a video, so yeah, you will see that. And I will go this is Juliana, our main researcher in the dog lab with her dog. So as I said, it's a lab, but it's fun for dogs. They always come up with these cool inventions and try to understand the behavior of dogs. And so yeah, that's a fun study, and also very important because humans and dogs, there seems to be a very strong relationship between those 2 species. So it's also important to understand this relationship. And then we also have departmental members who use neuroscientific methods. They want to understand the nervous system to understand behavior and learning, and with that, of course, language, but not only language, but also voice recognition or facial recognition. These are all communicative cues. We not necessarily only have language, but our cognitive system uses a variety of different cues to interpret behaviors of others. And so you can learn about fMRI, EEG, and TMS in the lecture taught by Annika and Yolim. This is on Thursday this week. So do check that out if you're interested in all the cognitive abilities that we humans have and that you can learn from with these types of methods. Okay, so now we talked a lot about methods. I told you a lot of different methods. I introduced you to some of the basic methods that we use within our department. As I said, there's much more that you could explore. You can go in much more detail into any other field. So now, what does that mean for reconstructing human history? And I would like to go through one case study, which is the Pacific settlement, which was also talked about briefly in the video. So what can language offer us? Or also, what types of data can we combine with language family trees? So I talked about language as being the important thing that you need to reconstruct human history, but as I know, you have different backgrounds. Some of you are archaeologists, some of you are geneticists or biologists. So what type of data could you imagine to get better insights in addition to language family trees? And can you think of any historical phenomena? So I will talk about the Pacific settlement, but I'm guessing that most of you have their own region where they are interested in, or historical phenomenon that could benefit basically from language family trees. So you can write your answer in the chat. This is optional because this is also something that we can discuss throughout the entire summer school, but maybe you have certain types of data that you think are interesting in combination to language family trees. And and also this would be the chance if you put it into the chat, all the others can see your answer, and maybe some of you have similar interests, so then you can chat afterwards. So this is your chance to put in some of the data that you feel are interesting. Yeah, I see. So domestic animals, yes, we talked about dogs, plants, definitely, genes, as mentioned in the video, and there are a lot of things coming on. Yeah, colonial incursion events. Yes, so also historical events. What are the influences? As you see from this map, if you remember the language family map that I showed you in the beginning. So colonialism, of course, that's why we see Indo-European in North America and South America. This is due to colonialism. So also something that we need to keep in mind. Yes, perfect, cool. And I hope that you will see some similarities and can check out what others wrote and what they are interested in. Okay, and we can also discuss that in the end. And all right. So the Pacific settlement, and we went in the video, basically we went to Vanuatu, and this is here. So we have Australia here and Fiji and Hawaii here. And this is a grouping of the different islands. So all these small greenish dots here are islands. And so we have Melanesia, so Vanuatu is a part of Melanesia, we have Micronesia, and we have Polynesia. And so the question is, how were these islands, which are distributed across the Pacific, settled by early humans? So there are two hypotheses in the literature that you can find. So there is one post-expansion hypothesis that the Austronesians originated in Taiwan about 5,500 years ago and spread through the Pacific in a sequence of expansion pulses and settlement pulses. And after that, they spread over 7,000 kilometers from the Philippines to Polynesia in less than 1,000 years. So if we go back to the map, so you start out here, then you go to the Philippines, and within a time span of 1,200 years, which is not a long time, you basically spread through all these different islands, and you don't know where they are, right? So you basically go by ship and try to find an island. So this is really amazing if we think about how this came about. And this hypothesis predicts an origin of Austronesian between 5,000 to 6,000 years BP. There's also another hypothesis that you will find in the literature, which is called the slow boat diffusion, which predicts an extensive social cultural network of maritime exchange in Wallacea in the region of modern-day Sulawesi and Moluccas, around 13,000 to 17,000 BP. So the origin here in this hypothesis of the Austronesians would be 13,000 to 7,000 BP, which is not like, there's a huge difference between those dates. So how can language or language family trees help us to establish whether or not one of those hypotheses is correct? So in this study, let me just go back. So this is a study by Russell Gray, our director, Alexei Dormant and Simon Greenhill, one of our department member, and they investigated this question or tested those two hypotheses and used basic vocabulary. So you all know what basic vocabulary by now means. So they had 210 items, and they are cognate sets, as I said. So these are the sets that define whether or not two words are direct inherited. And that's for 400 well-attested Austronesian languages. And as we saw in the glotted log ethnologue comparison in the beginning of this lecture, there are around 1,200 Austronesian languages in total. And what they used were models of cognate evolution based on Bayesian phylogenetic methods to define the Austronesian language subgroups and linkages. So as you saw in the methods, very brief introduction to Bayesian phylogenetic methods. And as I said, you will learn about that in the lecture, in the class on Friday. But basically, this method goes through all the different possibilities on how those groups that we see today have evolved and what's the output. So the output is a tree that shows 4 major expansion pulses and 2 pauses. So you will see here, so here is a pause. You start out here, 7,000 BP. This is the time span that you can see. And then you have the subgroups. So each of those letters is a grouping of Austronesian languages. And so this the branches colored in red, there is a significant increase in language diversification. So there was a lot of diversification in this first pause. And yeah, so if you go back to the article, you will see what the different letters for which Austronesian languages they stand for. And what this basically tells us is that the origin, of course, in Taiwan. And then there was this first pause. Then we have the spread throughout the Philippines. And then we have a second pause here. And then you have the other islands. And these color codings relate to the different subgroups that you can see in the tree. So the results, to sum up, so there is a change topology that supports the structure that was predicted in the first hypothesis, so the pulled pause expansion. So basically the language tree tells us that, okay, these languages branch from one another. So they developed in two different directions. They split, as you would also call it, and this happened and started at a mean age of or years of 5,230. So this would be the origin of Austronesian that was established by the models. So the computational modeling predicted that Austronesian, or the origin of Austronesian, was about 5,230 years ago. And there you can also see the branch lengths. So you have different branch lengths that are indicated by the model. And this is also connected to time depth, as I said. So here's the time depth. And so before the settlement of the Philippines and corresponding with the development of a Proto-Malayo-Polynesian language around 3,800 to 4,500 years BP. As I said, so Proto-Malayo-Polynesian is an ancestral language. And after the settlement of Western Polynesia by 2,000 years BP before the expansion into Central and marginal Eastern Polynesia. So basically from that tree, we can reconstruct the history that is supported also, and we can support it also with genetic data if we want, but this is something that language can tell us about human history. Okay, so summing up, and I hope I'm in time. Let me just check. Yeah, this looks good. So to sum up, we saw a lot. This was a very long lecture. I hope that the different things and tasks that you did kept you a little bit in the loop. So the goal of studies in linguistic and cultural evolution is to understand and explain diversity in language and culture. So as I said throughout this entire lecture, there is a huge diversity. Of course, diversity is different in different places. So we have, for example, the African continent where you have a lot of language diversity, whereas in Europe, you have less language diversity. If you define language diversity in terms of one language family having a lot of languages in one family. But researchers explore the processes and causes of linguistic and cultural diversification. So we want to know what led to this diversity that we see, the differences that we see, what driving forces are behind that diversification, and how can we also test certain hypotheses, as I said in the case study. So if we have hypotheses within the literature, we can test them with those models and test whether or not they are correct, or whether or not we need to reformulate certain processes that happened, or And the main aim, of course, is to find more about the human past. We use methods ranging from qualitative analysis, so field work and language documentation of individual languages in general, or of specific language features, to the creation of databases. As I've shown you, we have several databases in our department that we use that have different purposes. So we have databases that are that have cultural data, that have linguistic data, that have other types of data as well. And then with that, we do those large-scale phylogenetic studies. So there is a huge process that you need to keep in mind. If you see a very elaborate phylogenetic study, there goes a lot in it, and there are a lot of people involved to even get to the point that we can do those large-scale phylogenetic studies. And we also use, and that's what we saw in the video, that different types of evidence from archaeology, genetics, and linguistics can shed light on fundamental questions about human history. So we need to work interdisciplinary, and that's why we established that summer school, so that we can have this exchange of different experts, of people who work in different areas, but can combine these different types of data. And it's a huge project, but I think it is worth it, and it's certainly something that will give us all a better insights into the human past. So with that, I would like to quickly, so I pointed you to some of the classes that you will hear throughout the summer school, but I still want to shed light on all of the classes that you will see in the section of linguistic and cultural evolution, so that you know where to go. And so we have not only we as the Department of Linguistic and Cultural Evolution at Max Planck Institute, there are other people interested in language evolution, definitely. And I'm very happy that Balthasar Bickel agreed to be our keynote speaker, and he will talk about nature and culture and language evolution. That's next week on Monday at 11. So you will hear more about some very cool studies. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I hope you too. And then we have a roundtable discussion on Thursday. So as I said, it's important to know why we do this interdisciplinary research. And you saw already Mary in her environment doing language documentation. You will also have Katharina and Wolfgang. They will discuss why do we need interdisciplinary research. And this is on Thursday at 5 p.m. So this is one of our evening events. And then we have multiple case studies. We have a lot of case studies, and all of them have this interdisciplinary goal in mind. And one of the case studies is from the Trans-Eurasian case. We have the Americas of one of the areas. We have Bantu languages and archaeology, and we have Southeast Asia as a linguistic area. And then we also have a workshop on how to work interdisciplinary. So some of you might not have the possibility to work with many other people from other fields. So how can you establish an interdisciplinary group, or how can you work with people from other fields? I think this will be also fun. This is on Friday, the last day of our summer school. Okay, that's it. I have the references here as well, so you can check them out. As I said, I will post the slides on Mattermost and will put them in the chat. You can also talk to me in the Mattermost. And yeah, I hope I'm a little bit earlier, but we also started a little bit earlier. So I'm happy to hear your question. You can put your questions into the chat, or you can unmute yourself. I will stop sharing the screen now.